It was a cold winter's evening. The last of the pale blue sky was escaping over the tile roofs as I strolled past the orderly houses of Notting Hill, London. I had just finished another arduous shift at the local health food store, catering to the opulent, old, and odd folks who could afford to live in this neighborhood. As I drifted through the streets, so did my mind as I trusted my feet to take me down the long and well-trodden path back to my crummy apartment. I thought of what was left in the fridge, what my girlfriend was up to, and my plans for the weekend when, as I turned the corner towards my block, my attention was drawn to a large, dark mass situated in the middle of the pavement. The unmaintained streetlights of this side of town cast little light over it, and as I approached, I saw the silhouettes of two dark, triangular points, which made me think it was a resting urban fox. But as I drew closer, it remained motionless. Pulling at my curiosity, I stood before the object. It was a demon's head, carved from stone. Its features were angular, almost V-shaped, as a thin chin curved up to a wide, grinning mouth. Its eyes, cut deep into the stone, pooled shadows into its sockets. Above its temple protruded two large horns, casting pincer-like outlines onto the pavement. Its appearance seemed designed to unsettle. Like a gargoyle's, old and weathered, it seemed like it had been outside for a long time. As I stared into its dark, hollowed eyes, immediate questions rushed into my mind. How did this get here? If it was a gargoyle head, why is it so far from a church? If it was from the church, why was it stolen? Even if it wasn't from a church, why would someone just abandon this relic out in the open? An intoxicating wave of confused curiosity washed over me as I weighed out different scenarios to justify the situation. A sudden chill breeze woke me from my pondering. I had forgotten how late it was. I glanced around the empty street, then to the head, and then to the short walk back to my apartment block. At the very least, this could be worth something, I justified to myself as I picked it up by the horns and made my way towards my building. A shimmer of regret passed through my mind as I saw the out of order sign plastered across the elevator doors. Rotten luck, I thought to myself as I began hauling the heavy head up the 7 flights to my apartment. The head seemed to become heavier with every step, so by the time I made it to my door, I was drenched in sweat. Unlocking my front door, I could hear my girlfriend, Amber, pottering around in the kitchen. "I'm home," I called out to the other room as I slumped the demon's head onto the floor. "Dinner's almost ready," she replied as succulent-scented tendrils of chicken fajitas hit my nostrils. "I decided to use the rest of the roast chicken we had left over," she spoke as she came around the corner to greet me. "Hopefully it's not too dry." She suddenly stopped. Her cheerful disposition turned into a sour grimace as she stood staring at the head resting on the floor. "What is that?" she said with disgust. "I found it just up the road from here," I said sheepishly, taken aback by the disapproval. "It was just lying there out in the open." Her eyes met mine, brows furrowed. "It's demonic," she said coldly. I want it out. Amber had always been the responsible and proper one of us two. Although not a believer, she had been raised a Christian, and I think she still retained a lot of the traditional values. "I think it's a gargoyle's head. Do you not think it's a curious find?" I replied cautiously, gesturing to the head. "It must have some interesting story behind it, and besides, it's only a lump of stone. It's not going to hurt you," I said with a jesting tone. Unimpressed, Amber crossed her arms. "Well, someone must have thrown it out for a reason, and I'm going to give you as well." She spoke her next word slowly and punctually. "I don't want here." Last of my energy after a long day began to change. I'm not hauling it back down those stairs today. Besides, it's probably worth something. We need the extra cash at the moment. This was not the answer she was looking for. I hoped for the solace of some good old-fashioned TV and dinner to escape her glares, but of all nights, the TV refused to work. So we sat and ate in relative silence. Sitting at our small kitchen table, I couldn't help but glance down the hallway at the demon's head. The shadows cast into its eyes gave the appearance of it looking right at me with a wide, stony grin. Amber and I went to bed early that night, grateful for the sweet embrace of sleep after a less than ideal day. My rest was snatched from me when I was awoken by what sounded like a woman screaming. It didn't sound like a drunken gaggle of girls who would often be making their way home at this time of night. This sounded like a woman in distress. I climbed out of bed and made my way to the window. At first, I saw only the empty street, but another screech directed me to the source of the noise. A lone fox was stood with its head arched back, calling out. Right in the spot, I found the demon's head. A light chill ran down my spine. It was odd to see a fox screaming like that this time of year. It wasn't their season. My mind flashed to the sinister grin of the demon's head. Just a coincidence, I told myself. Making my way back to bed, I glanced at our alarm clock. 3:33 a.m. Some would say a witching hour. I almost laughed. It seemed as if the stars were aligning tonight to try and creep me out or scare me, to bring out the childish nature of fearing the dark. Ghoulish figures hiding in wardrobes or monsters under the bed, waiting to snatch your feet. Nice try, life, I chuckled to myself. I almost went to bed feeling self-assured of my own lack of unease when, as I was about to climb under the covers, I saw the glint of Amber's eyes staring directly into mine. She looked scared. Her whole body was slightly trembling. Sleep paralysis, I thought. Amber was afflicted with this most nights, so this was not unusual. However, I'd never seen her eyes so open before. Amber, I said softly as I went to nudge her awake. As soon as my hand touched her shoulder, she darted up screaming as if she'd just been electrocuted. After a moment, I was able to get her calmed down. Did you have a nightmare? I said, beginning to stroke her hair. She pushed my hand aside. I dreamt you came into the room, or at least I thought it was you. She paused, looking away from me. But instead of your face, it was that damn demon's head. It was just standing there, laughing at me. And then it lunged in to grab me. She instinctively touched her shoulder where I tried to wake her. Amber slumped back into bed, turning her back to me. Just need sleep. I didn't push her on it any further, lest I reawaken our previous argument. I laid down on the bed next to her. The encounter had left me feeling anxious, and I felt stupid, because it did. As much as I tried to push the feeling away, there was the nagging and unrelenting thought that there was something genuinely evil about that demon's head. I felt childish for even thinking it. It was just a menacing-looking bit of stone. This sudden influx of bad luck and strangeness must be a coincidence. Amber's reaction must have sent me on a spiral. She put the idea of evil into my subconscious, and now it's just manifesting in my psyche. I rolled these thoughts over and over, but that nagging unease still remained. Realizing sleep seemed an impossible task, I grudgingly got out of bed, realizing the TV was not an option. I picked up my book from the bedside cabinet and sat down at our kitchen table. Turning on the sideboard lamp, I began to read where I left off. As I read, my eyes couldn't help but wander to the dark silhouette of the demon's head resting where I'd left it at the end of the hallway. It looked even more ominous in this lighting. Its grin seemed to twist up just that little bit more. Screw it, I thought, as I put down my book. I picked up the head and brought it to the kitchen table for inspection. I looked upon the stone face with a new sense of distaste. Never before had an object caused me so much grief in such a short time frame. Yet as I looked into its shadowy sockets, the questions that initially drew me to it bubbled to the surface. "Where did you come from?" I thought quizzically. As I lifted up the head to rest it on its chin, my fingers brushed the back of its skull. It was smooth. Spinning it around, I was surprised to notice there were no cracks or fissures. This can't have been a gargoyle's head. There was nothing to indicate it had been attached to anything. Turning it back to face me, I studied its face. Although weathered, the face was surprisingly lifelike. Its skin was textured well, giving the appearance of well-worn leather, and I could see the finely carved wrinkles around its forehead and eyes. It was then that a pungent smell began to hit my nostrils, like a mix of rotten eggs and dog shit. The scent grew stronger and stronger. The smell must have been masked by our dinner earlier. Trying to find the source, I leaned my nose in closer. It seemed to emanate from the creature's eye sockets. I tried to swivel the head nearer to the lamp to get a closer look, but no matter the angle, shadows seemed to envelop the deepest parts. Frustrated, I began to snake my index finger inside to see if I could feel something festering. Just as it was about to reach my knuckle, I felt a sharp jolt of pain as I felt something stab into my finger. I darted my finger out, feeling it hit a vein, and I watched a small dribble of blood roll out of the demon's eye socket like a single crimson tear. Though a small cut, my finger began to throb incessantly, and my mind immediately went to the nasty infections I'd get from whatever rusted, putrid needle had been hiding beyond view. I immediately washed it in the sink, dribbled over a bit of leftover vodka, and placed a small plaster over it. Defeated, slumped down on the sofa across the room. As soon as my head hit the armrest, intoxicating wave of drowsiness fell over me. But a sudden lack of care from my predicament. Light crept in. The amber peering in the kitchen mirror seemed to get her hearing. "What time is it?" I croaked. Not one said from the wake. 1 p.m. I'm about to go to work, he said, adjusting the last fasten right ear. "Why did you sleep on the sofa last night?" He quizzed me with a side glance. I was investigating the demon's head again. Guess it must have put a spell on me. Before I could reach the bedroom, I joked lightheartedly. Amber turned to face me with a stern look. "Well, I'm glad you got some good rest. I slept awfully last night." She glanced at the demon's head still resting on the kitchen table. "I want that gone today. I'm not sleeping another night with that thing under the same roof." "Seriously, Amber?" I replied with unexpected anger. "Don't you think you're being a little childish?" "I'm serious," she said as she turned towards the hallway. "Also, it stinks in here. I think some food has gone off." Before I could reply, she slipped out of sight down the hallway with the sound of the front door opening and closing marking her exit. Dejected, I clawed myself off the sofa. Thank God it was my day off. I stood peering down at the demon's head. I guess I better make some attempt to make it look like I am getting rid of it. I grabbed my phone and took a couple of pictures of it. I listed it on my Facebook marketplace as Gothic Stone Demon's Head. I thought 100 pounds seemed fair, if a little undervalued. As I hit post, my attention was drawn to the plaster I had covering my cut from the previous night. It looked dark. Peeling it back, I saw that although the bleeding had stopped, there was a black sprawl where it had been. It looked like a fountain pen in wet paper. Small black tendrils like spiders' legs swirled from the center. It looked infected, yet the pain had completely subsided. Before I had a chance to ponder on this oddity, my phone buzzed. Someone had replied to my posting. I almost ignored it. I hadn't expected an offer so soon, and a part of me wanted just a little bit more time with the demon's head. But the message caught my eye. You have what is mine. It had been sent from an account without a profile picture by the name Olga Verochka. Both confused and intrigued, I picked up my phone and typed out the message. You want to buy it? After a few seconds, I received a reply. You have what is mine. It must be returned to me. Almost annoyed by her brazenness, I typed out, I have no way of confirming that. Are you going to pay for it? I saw the text dots appear for a moment, then disappear. After another 30 seconds, Olga just messaged a plain yes. Reluctantly, I told her the location of my apartment block, and to another surprise, she said she would be there in just under 10 minutes. I sat down at the kitchen table, giving myself a moment to rest before I would have to haul this lump of stone back down where it had come. Looking at the idol head, I noticed that the blood that had dribbled onto it the previous night had disappeared. Very strange. I'm sure Amber would not have cleaned it if she was so adamant to be rid of it. Aided by the daylight spilling into the apartment, I was actually able to see into the creature's sockets. There was nothing in them, just two clear carved holes. Cautiously, I even stuck my index finger back in. There was nothing sharp, just the feel of smooth stone on my fingertips. What had cut my finger then? Before I could investigate further, my phone buzzed again. Olga was waiting outside. Time to go, I said out loud to the demon's head, picking it up by the horns. The head felt much heavier than I remembered it being. Each step down the stairwell seemed to be a test to my balance, and each step seemed to amplify the nagging voice in my mind that I should just bring the head back up to my apartment and keep it for a little longer. Nevertheless, I persevered, and I made it to the entrance of my apartment building. Taking a quick scan of the outside, my eyes immediately locked on a peculiar-looking old woman standing by a lamppost just some meters away. She was dressed in a mass of black fabrics, all held together by safety pins of various sizes. A long and straight black hat, held together in a similar fashion, sat upon what looked like an old judge's wig, which, on closer inspection, looked like a series of rolled-up bits of wool, again all held together by safety pins. If anyone were to own the demon's head, I thought, it would be her. The dark, round spectacles she was wearing locked onto what I was holding, and she immediately shuffled over to me. Come. Give him back to me, she said in a vaguely Eastern European accent that I could not pinpoint. Reaching to grab the head from me, I instinctively pulled it away. Are you Olga? I said, already knowing the answer. Are you deaf? Olga replied coarsely. I said, give him back to me? Fine, but watch out. It's very heavy. As soon as I began to outstretch my arm, she snatched it off me with ease. Holding it up to her face, she rolled it around, inspecting every inch as if it were merely made of papier-mâché. Naughty, 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 she muttered to the head as she inspected it. I turn away for 1 second, and you run. She stopped as her eyes peered into its sockets. Olga then turned to face me. A strange concoction of anger and fear had plastered over her face. How long have you been in possession of this? Just a day, or a night, I mean. I began to stutter. Though small, the woman had an overbearing presence. Olga put down the head and began fussing over me, pulling up the sleeve on one arm. Hey, what are you doing? I protested. But then she flipped over my right hand. I hadn't stopped to check it during all this confusion. But in this short time, the dark sprawl had spread from my fingertip all the way down to my palm. The mark of the beast, she muttered, holding my hand. You must come with me immediately, she said, scooping up the head from the floor. What? No. I need to go to the ER immediately. It wasn't like this 10 minutes ago. I peered closely at the dark tendrils cutting through the creases of my palm. I swear I could see them slowly moving. He knows you are getting rid of him, so he's trying to speed up the process. His influence only goes so far. Olga gestured a bony hand down the road. Come, I live not far from here. What are you talking about? I said indignantly, still clutching my hand. Whose influence? The more you wait, the harder it'll be to get him out, she remarked. And besides, you still want your 100 pounds, don't you? Olga smirked as she began trotting down the road. I had no choice but to follow. As we walked, I felt the confused gazes of onlookers as we made our way silently through the streets toward a stretch of residential houses. I decided to break the silence. Are you going to tell me what all this is about, then? I questioned her. I felt a sideways glance through Olga's spectacles. Do you believe in absolute good and evil? She cried, ignoring my question. I don't think so, I said pensively. Everything's relative. Olga tutted. The youth, she muttered to herself. Nothing is sacred to you. She didn't give me a chance to reply, patting the head of the stone demon. She exclaimed, This is evil. It preys on the blind and ignorant. It will submerge you into its dark waters and drown you because all the while you'll be proclaiming these waters do not exist. I looked down at my index finger was now completely black, and small dark tendrils were snaking up my other fingers and were working their way up my wrist. Is this going to take long? I really think I need to go to the hospital. Fool, you must be deaf or you do not listen. Olga cursed, shaking her head. Thankfully for you, we are here. I had expected her to take me to some Gothic castle or perhaps a church, but here we stood before an unremarkable, whitewashed residential house. It looked no different from any others on that street, save it was far more dilapidated than the rest, with its front gardens scraggly and unkempt. Olga beckoned me inside. The interior was far more as I expected. The walls were lined with a crimson damask wallpaper, with small gold chandeliers dimly lighting the hallway, illuminating the side rooms which seemed to be lined with shelves. There seemed to be a cornucopia of oddities and curiosities, peculiar statues, ornate chalices, and jars just dusty enough to hide their contents. What is all this stuff? I asked, as my eyes scanned the more foreign-looking objects. Relics, artifacts, tools. She waved her hand disinterestedly, as if referencing kitchenware. Some good, most evil. I am a protector of these items. There are not many of us left with the knowledge to do so. She led me into one of the less cluttered side rooms lined with bookcases. There was a small pedestal in the middle of one of the shelves where she placed the head. So someone carved this demon's head and imbued some kind of evil magic into it, I asked, trying to sound like this was a sane thing to say. Someone carving this monster, Olga scoffed. No, you silly boy. This is a petrified skull. The word sent me reeling. She thinks it's an actual demon's head. This has to be some kind of prank. I scanned the room for cameras, then for anything that would indicate this was a practical joke. But then I looked at my hand. It was now completely black. What is this thing trying to do to me? I said, feeling fear starting to creep into my voice. He is trying to claim your body, Olga said calmly as she scanned the books lining the shelf. The blood you gave allowed passage into your body. It will try to envelop your soul and claim it as a new vessel. Why don't you just destroy the head? I asked desperately. Kill a demon. Soul will just find another. Here it is, she said, pulling the book from the shelf. Long ago, someone was able to destroy this creature's body while trapping it within its own skull. That lump of stone is the only thing containing it. She began flicking through the old leather-bound book. The calligraphy looked medieval, with different letters merging into strange creatures and people in odd positions. As she read, I looked at the demon's head. The shadows in its sockets seemed to swirl around as I began to feel a sharp pain creeping into my head. Ah, yes, that's it. Olga got up to fetch a small carved box set on one of the shelves. To begin, I must have a drop of your blood. She opened the box to reveal a short, ornate dagger, its handle carved with intricate inscriptions in a language I could not decipher. She picked it up and walked up to me. "May I have your untainted hand?" she asked, and I obliged. She made a small prick on my fingertip and placed the dagger back in its box on the table next to me. "Now I just need a drop on this parchment." She pulled out a large piece of thick paper from a leather folder on the shelf and pressed the center of it onto my fingertip, leaving a bloody fingerprint in the center. "I just need to prepare a sigil. This will take a moment." Olga turned her back to me and began copying the sigil from her book, inscribing it in ink with a feather pen around my bloody fingerprint. I stood waiting with my head beginning. A single sickening thought entered my mind. Kill her. It sickened me because I wanted to, and I knew I could. She was a deceiver, my mind told me. She had led me here on false promises, filled my head with tall tales. She was just trying to rid me of what is rightfully mine. So was Amber. She was filling my head with doubts. I should kill her too. That thought immediately shook me from my daze. Kill Amber? What the hell am I thinking? Why would I do that to a woman I love? A sudden thought was thrust into my mind. It must be Olga. That damned witch has put a spell on me. I looked down. The blackened hand was clutching the small dagger. The dark tendrils had made it up to my elbow. I looked down at Olga, still touching up the last of the sigil. My arm began to raise the dagger. The demon's grin seemed to widen and bare its teeth. Do it. Kill her. My conflicting thoughts bashed together like two budding goats, cascading waves of murderous intent, drawn back by the tides of rational thinking. I wanted to submerge myself in the waters of malice while walking above it. I felt my untainted arm begin to grapple with the other. Both arms were straining, trembling under the immense pressure exerted on one another. But the tainted arm was my dominant, and it slowly forced itself down on the other. Olga suddenly got up from her inscribing, turned around to face me, holding the sigil she had just completed. "You may be deaf, but are you blind to the evil before you?" she proclaimed, seemingly unfazed by the dagger edging her way towards her. "No," I cried, my voice straining under the pressure. "I see now." Olga held her palm over the sigil and began to recite an incantation that sounded like Latin. As soon as a few words had left her mouth, I saw my fingerprint begin to emanate a soft glow as an immediate searing pain shot up my tainted arm. It felt like my whole arm was being pressed up against a hot grill, and the pain forced a scream, causing me to drop the knife. Still Olga kept fighting her evil. Corners of the parchment spontaneously caught fire as I felt the worst of it localized. Black, oily tendril began to emerge. Snaked through the air, working its way back to my eye socket. Unparalleled. Though someone was pulling out my veins. I watched the black coloring begin to pool out of my arm like water through a plug hole. There was now an oily stream connecting me and the demon's head. The shadows cast upon its face seemed to change from a piercing grin to a pained grimace as the last of the darkness pooled from my hand. The parchment Olga held was now completely aflame, and any thoughts of murderous intent were blown like dust from my mind. Just as the last black droplet escaped my fingertips, she threw the sigil up and the last embers burned away, leaving a small flutter of gray ash that drifted through the air. As I saw the last dark tendrils get sucked back into the demon's head through its socket, I blacked out. Am I replied with genuine uncertainty. This all still feels very much like a dream. Olga put down her pen and turned to face me. You danced with the devil today. How did it feel? My mind rushed over the previous events, trying to find some rational explanation to all of it. Some inkling to say this was just some sudden influx of hysteria. But I couldn't convince myself. I've never experienced something so horrific. It made me want to kill you even. Kill my girlfriend. I've never had a thought so horrible. I put my head into my hands, feeling foolish and ashamed. Olga turned back around, inspecting her handiwork on the scroll. You don't think there's any relative good from your experience? She said unsympathetically. No, of course not, I said, bolting up from my seat. I think that's absolutely the evilest thing I have ever encountered. Good, then you are finally awake. May you never sleep on that intuition again. She pointed to a small white envelope on the table. There's your 100 pounds. You can take it and leave. I have removed his hold from you. I was taken aback. She spoke to me as if she was just some overworked physician dealing with a needy patient. No, I can't possibly take that from you. I think you saved my life. Still inspecting her scroll, she waved her hand indifferently. No, boy. I saved your soul. If you won't take the money, then you can pay with a promise that you will return the head to me if it ever happens to find you or someone you know again. Of course, I replied sincerely, but already Olga was gesturing her hand towards the door. Now leave, she said coarsely. You have stolen enough of my attention. I thanked her as I made my way past the lines of shelves, out her front door, and onto the street. A part of me hoped I'd be instantly swamped by cameras, friends, and family, appearing from behind garden walls to point and laugh at how I'd fallen for such an elaborate prank, yet only the stillness of the quiet urban street was there to greet me. I began my walk home, trying to find some normalcy in the buildings and people that I passed on my way, but everything seemed foreign, as if I were seeing it for the first time. Everybody looked slightly suspicious, and every dark corner seemed likely to have some abhorrent creature waiting to pounce upon me. It was as if the floor that held up all my pre-existing knowledge had shattered. I was tumbling into the darkness of the unknown. I felt almost drunk on the existential anguish. Nevertheless, my feet found their way home. My headfirst dive into a manic despair was only slightly halted by the removal of the out of order sign from the elevator. There is some good left in this world, I tried to joke to myself as I stepped in the lift. My immediate thoughts went to Amber. Would I tell her about this experience? No, she'd think I was insane or lying, and there's no way I would be able to prove any of it. Then it hit me. I wouldn't be able to talk about this to anyone. Not friends nor family. They'd think I'd lost it and avert their gaze from me, like any other raving lunatic you'd find walking these streets. How many of them experienced the unexplainable? The lift doors opened, and I stepped out. I took a deep breath to compose myself before entering the apartment. I could hear the TV playing from the other room, another bit of good to lift my spirits. I'm home, I called out. I heard a small, joyful shriek from the other room as Amber bounded over in her pajamas to catch me in a flying hug. An instant warm reminder of the real good in the world washed over me. Sorry for being cold to you about that gargoyle head, she said with her hands clasped around my shoulders. Work has been hard on me of late, and I took my frustrations out on you. It was just bad timing to bring something like that home. I'm sorry. I pulled her in closely as I tried to keep in the tears that felt brewing in my eyes. Don't apologize. You were right. That thing was evil, so I got rid of it. Whoa, what happened to her? It's just a lump of stone, she said teasingly, and she broke away from my hug. But then she must have seen something in my disposition. Are you okay? She asked caringly. I'm fine, I lied. It's been a long day for me, too. I love you, Amber. I love you too, baby, she smiled. Now come on, the TV is working again. Let's just be lazy tonight. I'll order us some dinner. Amber, without knowing it, became my anchor any time in my day-to-day when I was reminded of the horror that I experienced and its connotations to all the unknown evils that could be waiting just out of sight. It was my thoughts of Amber that kept me grounded and made me remember all the good that was there to be experienced. I tried with all my effort to forget what happened to me that day. Fine. Every once in a while, all the monsters waiting in the dark would come flooding back. Every time a screaming fox would wake me at 3:33 a.m.